Speedrunners like Kerem, Syxd, and others use this one quirk currently present in Fall Guys to get near world record times on Little Leapers. And why no matter how hard you try, you just can't speedrun like they do. And the reason is simple. The game currently has a physics exploit that lets PC players who are able to get 300 frames per second perform a strat called 360 dive. To simplify why this phenomenon even happens in the first place, Fall Guys physics is frame dependent or based on FPS, meaning certain movements like diving and spinning are affected by how many frames you're able to generate. FPS affecting your performance isn't native to Fall Guys, some other games have it as well. Quake 3 once upon a time had it to where if you had 125 and 333 frames, you could jump longer distances as well as jump higher than other players. Your velocity, gravity, and how fast your movements are constant, or it should be anyways, but with certain frame rates like 300 in our case, the game seems to handle it differently. Really, it all boils down to this. A small minority are using an exploit to get crazy times on maps like Little Leapers. Recently, Joe Mama Walsh, one of the developers, recently made a post on the Fall Guys Discord server saying should they make it to where everyone can do 360 dives, or should everyone be able to do a nerfed version of it, and lastly, make it to where no one can do it. And I'll give you my answer to this later in the video. With the release of Fall Guys SS3, they added Time Attack, which is essentially time trials from other games. This is where you race with other players and try to get the fastest time possible, and one of the maps that happens to be in it is Little Leapers, and people who get super high frame rates are able to get absolutely insane times. Now where 360 dives becomes an issue is on Little Leapers Limbo, a LTM or limited time mode that currently, as of the making of this video, has 2 rounds of Little Leapers along with a guaranteed Little Leapers finale. This made it to where spin divers would just dominate and win in 25 seconds or less. To put that into perspective, my fastest time is 29 seconds. I get 30 to 32 seconds almost every time I play Little Leapers, and I play on PC with 60 frames per second, so 360 diving in its current state is physically impossible for me to do. It's impossible for nearly 99% of the player base, and really only those with beefy computers are able to perform this strat. Now when Joe mentioned everyone can do a nerfed version of 360 dives, does he mean that even 300 FPS players would also have to do this nerfed version, or would they still be able to do it like normal? Are Switch players able to do this as well? I know it says everyone, but the Switch port is notorious for being underdeveloped and can get laggy at times, so a strat that consists of diving and spinning really fast could be near impossible to do. Fall Guys' physics is tied to its FPS or it's FPS dependent, which can lead to situations like this. Though I don't claim to be a game developer of any kind, I have learned a few things while researching this video. If I say anything incorrect or explain anything incorrectly, I apologize in advance. Right now, we don't know what the tick rate the game currently has. The tick rate is how fast updates or packets are being transmitted from the player and the central server, and it's measured in hertz. Packets contain things like player location, if they picked up an object, if they jumped, if they dived, etc. Think of tick rate as a server's frame rate. The higher the hertz, the better, just like how higher the FPS, the better the experience you'll get. Fortnite currently has a tick rate of 30 hertz, so that's 30 updates being sent from the game servers to the player 30 times a second. Fortnite used to have 8 hertz back when it first launched. I think Fall Guys probably has 20 hertz or maybe 30 hertz, definitely not 60 hertz. The higher your tick rate, the better the gameplay experience will be, but it will also be more expensive for Mediatonic to manage, especially in a battle royale where you have to send packets to over 60 players 20 times a second. They probably do some other alternative like have all the data collected locally and then the player's movement is sent to the server, or something along those lines. So having 20 hertz is really a cost saving measure, and jumping to 30 would give us like 2 to 4 frames of performance and it won't be noticed by the average player at all. It's not worth the huge price hike from 20 to 30. Client update rate is another big one. It's basically how fast the client is willing to receive updates or packets. The client is basically our copy of Fall Guys and it's basically a mirror of the server. Even if Fall Guys has 60 hertz tick rate, if the client or the copy of Fall Guys we're playing on receives 20 hertz, then it might as well be 20 hertz. One of the reasons why I brought up Fortnite in the first place is because the game has console ports just like Fall Guys, so they have to make sure those versions of the game are supported as well. And remember, Fortnite is also on the Nintendo Switch as well. Fortnite has way more stuff going on and it's one giant map with multiple zones or multiple sections, so Fortnite with all that has 30 hertz. I could totally see Fall Guys having 20 hertz, but I could definitely see them upping it to 30 hertz in the future, since not a lot goes on, at least when you compare it to other battle royales. One of the first things people do when making a game is create a gameplay loop, which is an infinite loop that deals with the simulation and the rendering or drawing of your game. This happens every single frame and every single second, and it doesn't stop until the game or round is over. Say for this simple example, you want to make your character move 1,000 pixels a second, and you have it set to 30 frames a second. It may work fine in that speed, however, if you double the frame rate to 60, you'll find that the character moves double the speed, and this only gets worse the more frames you have. You want the game's speed or logic physics to remain consistent no matter what hardware your end user happens to be playing your game on. This is quite the oversimplification, but hopefully you get the point. Some of you may be thinking, why don't they just cap the FPS to say 60 and be done with it? Well, capping your FPS to deal with an issue is quite primitive, and there are people who play the game at 144 frames per second and have a high refresh rate monitor, which can help the gameplay feel more smoother and thereby more enjoyable. Plus, you could fall into problems with your CPU thermal throttling, because it might have too much stuff in the game to process all at once, which could also lead to your game not drawing or rendering one or a few frames, which puts us back to our original problem with speed. PCs are not the only thing with CPUs, game consoles have them as well. And remember, we also have the Switch port as well. Why cap your FPS when you have a system that allows your game to run at the same speed or velocity regardless of your FPS? And that system is called delta time. While researching how FPS-based physics work, I stumbled upon videos about delta time, or DT. Now it's quite tricky to describe how it works, so I'll read you a quote from this article I found. Delta time describes the time difference between the previous frame that was drawn and the current frame. In a nutshell, it makes it to where games are not dependent on its frame rate. So even though you may run Fall Guys at 30 FPS, you'd run at the same speed or the same velocity as someone who was playing the game on 60, 144, or even 300 frames per second. Your frame rate independent. Essentially, delta time is something that should be used if you have to move, spin, dive, jump, and have to support multiple ports that run on different frame rates, like the Switch and Xbox One port that runs at 30 FPS. Well, I believe the PlayStation port all run at 60 FPS, but I can't be sure on that. And PC can run between 30 and 300 frames per second. We aren't sure if Fall Guys uses delta time for its physics. Unity does have delta time, and all of that is built in. Fall Guys is currently built on the Unity game engine. I wouldn't be surprised if they do use it. If they do, they would just need to tweak or adjust the amount of delta time based on if they want to remove 360 diving altogether or nerf it. Now, to confuse you even more, there are different flavors of delta time. The game is probably using variable delta time to where it takes the info from the previous frame, and based on the FPS you have, it'll automatically adjust the delta time. So for example, if you have 60 FPS, the game as it's updating will pass you 1/60th delta time. Then if it drops to 30, it'll adjust to 1/30th delta time. So basically you'll move the same speed as you were previously, whereas if you didn't have delta time, if you had lower frame rates, the game would actually move a lot slower. There are issues with this approach, however, because of how fluid variable delta time can get. Physics may be wacky depending on the frames a player has. They could move really fast and breaks collisions as a result. Or another thing they could do entirely is make it to where the server disregards the player's frame rate and does movement at a fixed duration, which I think sounds easier in theory anyways, but again, this is just all my theory and just speculation and just my attempt to try to explain delta time and tick rate and all that stuff, so hopefully you have a decent understanding of it. We have no idea what the backend of Fall Guys even looks like, so this could be easy to do or really difficult to do. I probably butchered most of the explanations, my apologies if I did. I'll link some great videos and articles on the subject matter if you're interested in the description below. Out of all the three options, what would I choose myself? And honestly, it's not an easy choice. If they remove all the other strikes you can do, like the one where you can hit the floor pad and shoot across to the side pads at the very end, I still think I would choose a third option to where no one can do it. This is basically exploring the frame dependent physics that Fall Guys currently has, and just acts like a bug that is only accessible to certain players. If they did make a nerfed version of it, I wouldn't be mad, so long as the fast version isn't in the game anymore.